I was looking this year for, we all know it's a difficult, intense year, and there's a lot of tension going on, particularly surrounding the Middle East, policy, the elections, all of the kind of things that we've been reading about and seeing in the news and feeling ourselves. I wanted to find a different way to enter a little bit of this discussion today, try to give you a little framework that at least motivates me and maybe will help you understand at least the way I see it, and maybe it will give you some comfort. So to begin, I want to tell you this story that one of my friends, who's a rabbi, likes to tell his congregation. It is a story of a husband who unfortunately forgot his wife's birthday. Late that night, she reminded him that he had missed her birthday that day. And he said to her, "Darling, I'm just so upset. Anything you want, ask anything of me to make this up, anything." She said, "Well, let's put it this way. I expect that tomorrow morning when I get out to the driveway, there'll be something there that can go from 0 to 200 in seconds. And if not, you're in big trouble." So the next morning, she had breakfast, she got dressed, she got out, she looked in the driveway, and there was this small package out there. She went out and she opened it up, and she found a bathroom scale. The husband's funeral took place this week. So I want you to think of that scale. I want you to imagine a scale and what happens when we step on it and how quickly it moves up. Because it's a metaphor that I want to use about the notion of fear in our lives and the way we live our lives. Ever since the dawn of the nuclear age, some of us remember here in this room doing those elementary school activities where we had a nuclear drill, where we had to go under our desks. Which is so bizarre, thinking about it. But here we were, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, where alarm would go off in our school, and we would go under our desk, which of course would protect us from the nuclear explosion that was about to take place. But that's how much the world really knew about the new power and about war at that time. But in a real sense, ever since the nuclear age, there's been this great fear that's been in the back of our minds that everything could happen in that way, that everything could be lost that quickly, from 0 to 200 in seconds. And there are movies that have reinforced it, television shows, the notion of the apocalypse. Evangelical Christianity preaches about it. And that scale is kind of a way of recognizing that that is always there for many of us in the back of our minds. And it feeds our fear. I would argue that in the world today, far more, the world has moved in a positive direction. If we imagine, the only nuclear weapons we know that were dropped at the end of World War II over Japan. So over 50 years ago, and those weapons have now existed in mass quantities around our world for half a century and not been used, for good reason. But we still have this notion of overriding fear. During that half a century, the world has actually moved in incredibly positive directions. There have been more civil rights. The wars that we've fought in the last half century have been more contained, more localized, far less life lost than before that. The truth is that there are more civil rights in the world today, more democracies in the world today. We have conquered many illnesses. We've controlled others. We live in a world that is wealthier, that is less poor. There are less starving people in the world today than ever before in history. We have to remember that is the true reality. And even though there's this kind of sword of Damocles that hangs over our head that is this nuclear holocaust, the truth is that isn't the world we live in. And we often allow it to stay deeply in our being and not to the surface. But then we read stories about Iran, and we read stories about North Korea or Pakistan, and we start to say, but that could be the beginning of World War III, a nuclear holocaust. And it could be. I'm not going to tell you it can't be. I have no idea. But neither do you. And neither does anyone in the world. No one knows the future. No one knows what will take place. I don't read a lot of novels, but I like Shalom Auslander's first book, Foreskin's Lament. So I read his second novel, which is called Hope, a Tragedy. Hope, a Tragedy. That's his novel. And his premise, he puts in the words of Professor Jove, who's a physician. He was, in a sense, he writes, the distillation of all Western and Eastern thought of the past 2,000 years combined. This is what Professor Jove posited. The greatest cause of anguish and hatred and sadness and death was neither disease, nor race, nor religion. It was hope. We are rational creatures, Professor Jove explained. Hope is irrational. And then he says, the most rational, the most hopeful person in the world who has ever known was Hitler. And this is how he explains it. He was the most unabashed, doe-eyed optimist in the last 100 years. That's why he was the biggest monster. Full of hope, the Führer was. A dreamer, a romantic even, yes. Pessimists don't build gas chambers. I don't buy that for 1 minute. I don't think that's the cause of pain and suffering in the world. I understand the way Auslander sees the world. I don't see it that way. I would argue that the United States of America was an enterprise built on hope and optimism. I would argue as well that the Torah itself gives us a sense of hope and optimism. The state of Israel, what could be more hopeful and optimistic than our people, after 2,000 years of wandering, of oppression, came back home and built, we built a beautiful state. We did. How can that not give us hope? Hatikva may be the anthem, but the reality is the state itself, for 64 years, has not only lived, but it has flourished. Instead of those survivors of the Holocaust giving up, they embraced hope. They built communities here in America, in Israel, around the world. They came back to life and they started again. Now, when our people first experienced total devastation, I could argue it might have been in the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, when the Romans killed us. They didn't kill us out of hope. They killed us out of revenge because we had the effrontery to make war against them. They destroyed our temple, they burned it, and they slaughtered our people. Now, most of the rabbis of that time were weeping and hopeless. One rabbi stood up. His name was Rabbi Akiba. Rabbi Akiba had been a poor human being who had worked his whole life in the fields before he learned to become a great rabbi. At age 40, he started his education. He knew that you could bring a difficult situation into a different level. He had done it in his own life. And Akiba, when he looked at the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem, he laughed. He laughed. And the other rabbi said, Akiba, why do you laugh? And Akiba said, why are you crying? And they said, because the prophet has now been true. Because the prophecy said, we see the city with wild foxes roaming from the ruins of the Holy of Holies, just as the prophet had said. And Akiba said, the reason you cry is the reason I laugh. Because there's a second prophecy. Now that the first has happened, the second will surely follow. And then he quoted this, there shall be yet old men and old women sitting in the broad places of Jerusalem. I know now, he said, that will happen. It has happened, my friends. It's happened right now in front of our eyes. That's what's in Israel. Old men, old women, young men, young women, living, rejoicing in the broad places of Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in the Galilee, in the Negev, everywhere in Israel. That's the world I see. I've told you before I'm no prophet, and I'm certainly not Akiba. But I believe there's plenty of reason to hope that every opportunity is there to view this world in a positive way. And I want to bring one witness to you who agrees with me. Last October, Gilad Shalit was released after 5.5 years of captivity by his Hamas terrorist overlords. 5.5 years, and he was released at the cost of over 1,000 Palestinians, many of whom had butchered Jews. But I want to read you his Rosh Hashanah message for this year. During the past year and the previous years, I have learned to look at things from a different perspective. In general, I try to see the glass as half full, and this is also what I wish for the people and the state of Israel. People can suddenly find themselves in extreme situations or unexpected crises. I believe people should prepare themselves mentally for the possibility that such situations may arise. This awareness helps people cope with such changes. If and when such an extreme situation arises, you must deal with it as calmly as possible and avoid doing things you will regret later. You must overcome. Faith can help, of course, but it must be accompanied by an awareness of reality. That young soldier who went into captivity and was totally isolated for 5.5 years emerged with hope and optimism. We, who sit here in freedom and prosperity, many of us, are more fearful than he is. Many of us worry more than he and his compatriots do. I don't know whether Iran will launch nuclear weapons or get them. I don't know whether Israel will counterstrike. I don't know whether the United States will enter into it. I have no idea, and anyone who tells you they know is a fool. No one knows. There is no expert in the world, and there is no one yet who has made those decisions that has now let anyone else know. That is the scary part. But that has been the scary part since we've had nuclear weapons. It could always have happened. But that isn't how we live our lives. We live our lives in the day-to-day, and I would argue that is the way we should understand Israel as well. The Israel you saw up there is the way Israelis see it. They live it. They rejoice in it. They enjoy their life. Do you know? I want to give you one other testimony that gives me comfort about nuclear weapons. Because though nobody really knows, there's at least one group that I trust who is keeping their pulse, their hand on the pulse, and that is the Mossad. You know what the Mossad is, right? Do we all know what the Mossad is? Israel's secret service. Israel's secret service that has such a reputation that when anything happens in the world, the Muslim world accuses the Mossad of having committed it. When in Norway that slaughter took place on that island, they accused Israel. When sharks were biting tourists in Sharm el-Sheikh, they accused the Mossad of training those sharks. I'm not making this up. You can't make this up. But thank God that that's the reputation of the Mossad, that they're seen as secret super agents who can make anything happen. You know, in Iran, there was just another event where power lines were blown up outside a nuclear facility. Now, nobody has taken credit, but everyone in Iran knows who did it. Let them believe that, whether it was or it wasn't. I trust the Mossad. I trust them with Israeli security. If you want to trust anyone, trust them. So I want to read to you what the former head of Mossad said, Meir Dagan, who knows more than any of us. He gave this lecture recently at a Haifa hospital. The all-seeing eye of Mossad will know when Iran moves to the stage of nuclear weapon production, and Israel will attack immediately. I want to read that again. The all-seeing eye of Mossad will know when Iran moves to the stage of nuclear weapon production, and Israel will attack immediately. He certainly knows more than any of us, and I certainly trust him and Mossad to understand what is necessary to do. Israel is prepared for any exigency. Israel prepares all the time. But Israel also celebrates its life. You know, they do reports in Israel. They study things like they do around the world. So this year, 88.5% of the population, 88.5% of the population in Israel stated that they're satisfied with their life in that country. 55% claim to be optimistic about their life, their future, and their, not just their economy. They know this because they are the military. They are the military. Their sons, their daughters, their husbands and wives, their fathers, their mothers, their cousins, their brothers, their aunts, their uncles, their sisters, they are the military. They know what's at stake. And there is nothing more motivating for Mossad and Israel than that fact. They understand the danger, and they have confidence in their ability to deal with it. Since the Holocaust, there is one lesson that we should all agree to. No one should be responsible for the safety of Jews other than Jews. I trust the state of Israel to be responsible for its safety. You should trust them as well. And this is not a political issue. America supports Israel. The American people support Israel. The American Congress supports Israel. The American administration supports Israel. Republicans and Democrats and independents support the state of Israel. There are those who are trying to make it a wedge issue in our election. And it's unfortunate because it is not an issue. It is not debatable in this country at this point. Thank God. Thank God this country, of all countries in the world, is the country that most supports the state of Israel. And Israel understands that there will be differences. We don't agree 100%. I don't agree with American policy. I don't agree with Israeli policy. But that doesn't mean I love it less, either of them. And when there are disagreements, they are disagreements among allies and friends. We agree with Israel as a country. The United States agrees with Israel as a country, not just because it's a little country stuck in the middle of all of these hostile enemies, not just because it's a democracy, but because we understand intrinsically that the values in Israel are our values, and that we are a kindred spirit, and we support each other, and we should always remember that. You know, this year has been a really good year for the TV show Homeland. I haven't seen it yet, but it's another import from Israel. It started in Israel, and then it's now won all these awards. And Claire Danes was just in Israel, and I don't usually read the New York Times Style magazine. But if you saw the cover of it, it had Claire Danes in Tel Aviv. So how could I not read it last week? And she said this about Tel Aviv. It's been a good year for Tel Aviv. She said, "It has been a lot more fun and cosmopolitan than I had anticipated." She referred to the country where people work very hard, worry very hard, and play hard and well. And there's an extremely positive and generous spirit toward us. So in Israel, they're optimistic. They're working hard, they're worrying hard, and they're playing hard. And they affirm their lives. So how about Tel Aviv? I want to give you a couple of things. Lonely Planet, some of you know this, it's a travel site, named Israel the third best city in the world. Third best city in the world. It was only founded in 1909. Third best city in the world. Huffington Post said it's the 8th best beach city in the world. How can you not want to go to the third best city in the world and the 8th best beach city? But there's more. American Airlines called it the best gay city in the world. Condé Nast called it a city worthy of architecture study. Traveler's Digest, I love this one, said it was the 10th best city for hot guys and the 7th best city for hot girls. You want a reason to go there? That's a reason. Bloomberg rankings scored Israel as the 6th healthiest country in the world. 3 of Israel's universities made the top 100 in the world. 24/7 Wall Street said Israel is the 6th happiest country in the world. It has one of the highest life expectancies, one of the lowest crime rates, and one of the lowest obesity rates. At 64, Israel is now older than over half the democracies in the world, and it's one of the only countries, along with our own, that has never had a break in democratic rule. It's pretty remarkable. Now, I don't want to downplay the threat. I don't want you to think that I'm not concerned or you shouldn't be concerned with the threat. There's no question. But I want you to understand that there are people watching who care and who are knowledgeable. And we need to trust them, because the hysteria that gets created by emails that are passed around or by reports that are in the press, the notion that we should take someone's word for it whom we don't know, who has no extra knowledge, and discount the word of those who are given the obligation to care for the safety of Israel is counterintuitive. We're smarter than that. We are. We need to rise above our fear. Don't let that scale jump up when you read an article. When you get an email, dump it. Don't pass it on. These emails make these rounds, and they get us excited. They are irrelevant. They're not coming from sources that truly understand or know. You know, there are things about Israel that I love. I listed just little things, but the very fact of Israel I love. But let me say something beyond it. There are some really small moments that I know you haven't read about. And I want to share particularly 3 of these moments. The first one has to do with Ismail Haniyeh. He's the head of Hamas in Gaza. The head of Hamas in Gaza. You know he doesn't love Israel. His brother-in-law was brought secretly into Israel this year for a special heart operation and treatment, and then brought secretly back to Gaza because there was no adequate treatment in Gaza. And Israel doesn't even turn down the brother-in-law of the man who is sworn to kill them. That's amazing. Really. That should just take our breath away. And also, the headlines were made with some of the African refugees that have come to Israel. They estimate there are about 50,000 of them. And there was this big headline about how Israel was expelling them. Do you know of the 50,000, how many were expelled? To date, less than 150. Now, they've closed off most of the border, but they're keeping the 50,000, and they will find a home there. And this year, the first African refugee became an Israeli military IDF officer, an officer in Israel's army. Came from Guinea, came as a 15-year-old on foot through the Sinai, was adopted by an Israeli family, and is now an officer, a second lieutenant in the IDF. I don't know how many of you like, I won't ask you to say this on this day, but caviar. Do you know now that Israel is the major producer of caviar, of fine caviar in the world? Because the Black Sea has been fished out. So that Israel has this caviar called karat. Is that what it's called? And it's served at the finest restaurants in America and in France. But I want to tell you another little thing in Israel. You know, Israel has submarines. You know that, right? Israel has submarines. Now, this year, an Orthodox man went on board the crew of a submarine. And he had a problem because he wanted to read Torah on Mondays and Thursdays and Saturdays, and of course the ship is at sea for long periods of time. Well, submarines are really small. So they had to create a Torah small enough to be put into the submarine. It's actually the size of a shoebox. But they did it. They did it because Israel does things like that, because it cares about everyone in its army, and it will find ways and solutions for it. You know, there are also kind of humorous things that happened there. Beyond that, the one that I laughed at. You know, the ultra-Orthodox have trouble looking at women. You know that? They avert their eyes when there are women. So right now they're selling these sunglasses in the ultra-Orthodox community. No, they are. This is true. That have been created with a blurred space that allows you to see about 2 meters in front of you so you don't trip. But when a woman is coming closer, it blurs her. They're available for the modest price of $6. That's, you know, also Israel. It has craziness. It has vitality. It has strength. And we should love her and trust her. Dr. Tal Becker said, we are a people that has been in the ICU unit of life for a long time, but we're not there anymore. Do you know that? We're not in the ICU unit anymore. We're not victims. We're not sick. We are healthy. And some of our people, particularly our young, have not been in the ICU unit with us. They weren't there. They don't know what it means to have been there. We need to help them understand and share why we care about Israel. But not out of fear, not out of hopelessness. We have to do it out of love and out of the notion that we will overcome this, that our nation, our people, our world will overcome whatever obstacle, because that's our history. That's who we are. This summer, Joni and I were sitting on a bench by Tel Aviv, and we were waiting for our nephew, Ronnie, and his wife and little baby Lou. And a man just came strolling down the boardwalk and sang to me. He was looking right at me. He must have been singing to me. He was saying in Hebrew, and these are the words he sang, because I wrote them down right away. I was so amazed, but it only happens in Israel. He sang these words: the holy temple was built not of stones. The holy temple was built of tears. And then he walked on. And I thought about that. You know, the temple itself, this temple, our world, was not really built of stuff. It's built of us, of our tears, of our hopes, of our dreams, of our aspirations. It's built of us, of human beings who care. And if walls get torn down and if temples get destroyed, we build them again. We build our community again. That's what Israel is. That's the hope. And that should never be interfered with by fear and some scale that will shoot our blood pressure up and make us feel anxiety. We always need to prepare, as Gilad Shalit said, but we also need to remember. So, we built our community, we built Israel, it's being built, it is hopeful, it is joyous, it is optimistic. I hope you will be there as well this year. And no matter what the headlines say, let us pray that we can tap into that optimism and suppress that fear and allow us to enjoy the world that we have created, the state that our people has built, our lives as Jews and as a people. So I want to conclude with this story. One of our members at a funeral recently, Leonard Luria, his son Peter told this story about him. I want to repeat it to you because it has to do with what we do on Yom Kippur morning. We invest in Israel by buying bonds, and that's what this story is about. Leonard Luria was very active in bonds throughout his life, and he was at an event with Ariel Sharon after the Lebanese War of 1982. Sharon spoke, gave his talk, and then Leonard stood up and started talking in his way. He was very blunt, opinionated, in his way about what he thought of Ariel Sharon's diplomacy and the way he ran the war. It was very critical, and made this whole speech about it. And then he turned around and he said to all of the people that were in the room who were there to buy bonds, he said, okay, now I've spoken my piece. I pledge $100,000 in bonds for Israel. What are you going to do? That's my question to you. I'm buying bonds again this year. I do every year, Joni and I. And we give them as gifts. I criticize, but I buy them every year. What are you going to do?